This week's Parsha is dominated by a section called the Tochacha, which means a rebuke, and it's a very dark description of what happens to the Jewish people when we're off mission. Terrible description, and unfortunately, we've actually seen it happen on more than one occasion to the Jewish people. But I want to focus on the beginning of the Parsha. It begins with a ceremony called the Bikurim. The Bikurim are the first fruits. So starting with Shavuos, which is one of the options for Shavuos, is to call it the holiday of first fruits, Chag Bikurim. So that begins the time, the window for farmers to bring their first fruits up to the Beit HaMikdash. They have a basket representing them, and they present it to the Kohen. They also make a declaration. That part of that declaration is actually in the Haggadah. It forms a part of the Haggadah where there's a kind of deep dive into elements of the story of the going out of Egypt, which is curious that they chose this, because they could have just chosen to tell the story when they actually tell the story, instead of this recap that's being told by a farmer who's coming up bringing his first fruits. But that's what they do. And in the past, when I've talked about one of the entries in the Museum of Things You Would Expect to Find in the Torah but Do Not, so one of them is the expectation that you would find Israel going into the land, the people of Israel going into the land of Israel in the Torah itself. The 5 books are not our only text. We happen to have an entire Tanakh. We have all sorts of books that are added after the 5 books, but the 5 books represent a revelation on a level that the other books do not. And there's an expectation that they represent a complete kind of revelation, and yet that is not there. You have to wait till the book of Joshua in order to read about the conquest of Israel and the dividing of it, and then the settling of it. So in the discussion of that exhibit in the Museum of Things You Would Expect to Find in the Torah but Do Not, as part of that discussion, I often mention the fact that at the Seder, it is also missing. That when we tell the story of the leaving of Egypt, the way we choose to tell the story does not acknowledge that we actually lived in Israel as a nation altogether for more than 1,000 years. And during at least some of those times, we were behaving as we should, and we were bringing the first fruits to the temple, and we were making this declaration. And at the beginning of the declaration, the first things he says, it says in verse 3, Uvasa ela Kohen, you will come to the Kohen, Asher yiyeh b'yamim hahem, who will be there in those days, because this is Moshe projecting. There's going to be a day when the land's going to be settled, and you're going to go to the Kohen, and you're going to say, Va'amarte lav, and you're going to say to them, Higadati hayom laHashem Elokecha. I make a declaration today to the Lord God, Ki basi el haaretz. I have come to the land. Asher nishba Hashem lavoseinu loseis lanu, which God swore to our fathers to give to us. So he seems to be making a declaration expressing the fact that this promise has been fulfilled. God said he is bringing the nation to the land. He swore it to the forefathers that he's going to bring the nation to the land. And here I am, kind of living proof. And here is a token of my productivity, of my gratitude and my productivity in this land. And then the Kohen takes it from him and then and places it before the altar. And then it goes on to say, Va'anisa va'amarta lifnei Hashem Elokecha. And then you go on and tell the following. And you say, Arami Oved Avi, which the Haggadah translates as an Aramean tried to kill my father. And, you know, translations of the Torah often translated as my father was a wandering Aramean, but the Haggadah translates it as Bikesh Lavan, Labedas Akol. Lavan wanted to destroy the whole project. He was trying to kill off Yaakov. That would have destroyed the whole project. So anyways, that's the part that you have in the Haggadah, but you don't have the first declaration. So if you're at the Seder, you would think the Jewish people left Egypt and haven't just been wandering for 40 years. No, they've been wandering for 3,300 years, still waiting to get there. Next year in Jerusalem. That's what it says at the end. But in between, we've just been wandering. Anyway, so that's that subject. If you want, you can visit the museum. There are visiting hours, although it only exists in my mind. There are still visiting hours, and you could visit it, and there are docents that are ready to answer any of your questions to stimulate more thought on the matter. But anyways, in the telling of the story by this farmer, who is could be you and me, in the telling of this story, at one point he says, "V'yareu osanu hamitzrim," so they did bad to us, "V'yanunu," and they caused us suffering, "V'yitnu aleinu avoda kasha," and they placed upon us difficult work, labor, "V'nitzak el Hashem Elokei avoseinu," and we cried out to God, the God of our fathers. Vayishma Hashem es kolenu, and God heard our voices. Vayaris anyenu, and he saw our affliction, vasamalenu, and our tribulation, vaslachatzenu, and the pressure. Vayotzienu Hashem emitzrayim, and God took us out of Egypt, biyad chazaka, with a strong hand, v'zro netui, an outstretched arm, v'mora gadol, with great awe. Osos and signs and wonders. And he brought us to this land. And he gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now I have brought the first of the fruits of the land, which God has given to me. Again, an affirmation that we received what was promised to us. You place it before the Lord your God, and you bow down before the Lord your God. So that is what he says, and then he's handed it over. He's prostrated himself on the ground before God, and then it says, what are you supposed to do with it? What are you supposed to do with this land? Now we've got it. What are you supposed to do with the land? V'samachta b'chol hatov asher nasan Hashem Elokecha l'veisecha. You shall be joyous. Simcha. You shall be joyous. You shall be happy. You shall be expansive with joy, with all the good, for all the good which Hashem, your Lord, your God, gave you, you, the Levi, Hager, the convert, Asher Bekarbecha, which is in your midst. Everybody, this is, if you, end of that section. End of that section. So this is laying it out. You've now handed over, you've said your thanks, you've shown God that you recognize the gift, the that he has fulfilled the promise. And now, how do you go forward? You go forward with joy for all the good which he gave us. That's the characterization of life going forward. What am I supposed to do today? Right now, I believe this is a continuing theme in this first part, but I just want to talk about, just focus for a second on some words. There's lots of sentences in this section that build on this, but I just want to just look at a couple words here, some cryptic words. So in this same chapter, several verses, is it the same chapter? Not necessarily. It's not the same chapter. In chapter 27, which is the next chapter, again, the chapters are not, they're just made up stuff. They're not Jewish. So in verse 9, so it's chapter 27, verse 9, it says, Vayidaber, this is talking about, he's describing that eventually when the Jews go into the land of Israel, they are going to build this altar. And it's going to be built out of stone. And on the stone, they are going to write the Torah and they're going to write it in a way that's very clear. And then it says, Vayidaber Moshe v'hakohanim halavim, Moshe and the Kohanim, the Levites, El Kol Yisrael Lemor. So Moshe, the Kohanim, and the Levites are going to say to Israel the following: Hasketh is probably how it was pronounced then. Hasketh. We would pronounce it either Hasketh or Haskes, but they probably said Hasketh. Hasketh. Ushma Yisrael. And hear, O Israel. Hayom hazeh, this day, nehiyeta la'am, you have become a nation, la Hashem Elokecha, to the Lord your God. Vishamata b'kol Hashem Elokecha, listen to the sound or the voice of Hashem Elokecha. Va'asita es mitzvosav, do his commandment, es chukav, and his statutes, asher anochi mitzav chayom, which I'm commanding you today. So this word is of unknown meaning. This word hasketh. It's of unknown meaning. Rashi acknowledges that, but he suggests that you follow the Targum, the Aramaic translation of Onkelos, which is an Aramaic word, which means be quiet.
Well, that makes sense.
Okay. And
listen.
Yes, be quiet and listen. What are you going to hear? when you're quiet and you listen.
Sure.
You're going to hear that today you have become a nation to the Lord your God. Now, on this, Rashi says, again, these are two Rashis on this verse, verse 9. The first one was Haskate, means be quiet. Then the next one is on the words, today you have become a nation. What does that mean, today you become a nation? Every day, it should be in your eyes that today you made a covenant with him. In other words, this is the day.
Every day.
Every single day. So I'm going to suggest the following. I will share with you my personal work. I share it because I think if I can do it, anybody could do it. I've been going back and forth about what to write on my tombstone. And so far, the winner is God watches out for the fools. And then on my wife's tombstone, may she live a lot longer than me, but on her tombstone, there's going to be an arrow towards mine, and it's going to say, he thinks I'm God. That so far is the leader. I've told it to my wife. She hasn't said no so far. That's number one. But if there was a number two, it would be, if he could do it, I can do it. I believe that a big part of the purpose of my life is for other people to see if he did something, I for sure can do it. So that's why I feel comfortable sharing my practice with you. There's some people who will share their practices and you're like, that's never going to happen. But when I share my practices, just know, I know it beforehand that nobody's ever going to have that reaction with me sharing one of my practices. You're just going to look at it. You're just going to have to decide if you want to do it. But there's never going to be a thing like, oh no, I wouldn't be able to do that. Okay, so this is something I've been working on, since during COVID. And I've shared it with you at different points, but I want to share it with you in this context. So during COVID, my kids are no longer in the home. They all have their own households, which means it's just my wife and I in the house. So when COVID hits and there's this shutdown, suddenly I'm experiencing silence in a way that I've never experienced it. I thought I knew what silence was, but now it was like profound silence. And so it drew me to explore silence. So I'm on Google trying to find people who live in silence. So there was once a movie I saw, I think it was a French movie about silence. Doesn't matter if it's a French movie because it's about silence. And a lot of the movie was silent. I mean, they were trying to give you the sense that you were with, and it was in a monastery where they were silent. And, I'm exploring people that live in silence. And I came across this man who I didn't realize how impactful he was. This is the first time I ever came across him. He's called Ramana Maharshi. And he was alive, I think, until the 1970 or something like that. So he must have been born at the late 1800s and or right about the beginning of 1900s and made it into the 70s. And for much of his life, he was silent. And even when people were gathering around him, he would remain in silence. And it's not like he never spoke. he would speak sometimes, and when he spoke, he would say, the deepest teachings are experienced in silence. You don't need words. Anyways, so I sort of noticed him, and then when I noticed him, I realized that there's a lot of people referencing him, and so one of his practices was, and this was the practice, if you had asked him if there's one practice, what should it be? That practice was to ask yourself, who is I? Who is I? And you reflect. You ask that question, you reflect. Now, I didn't, it was a very profound moment, when I heard that, and I started doing it. Now, obviously, this is an Indian gentleman who's Hindu. It did not seem like there was any idolatry involved in this practice, right? And it seemed to be consistent with things I had already been taught. And as our sages say, if somebody tells you there's wisdom amongst the Gentiles, believe them. Gentiles have wisdom. And so I sort of gently tested it out for a while. And again, I have since found lots of support for this, including Rav Shimon Shkop in the beginning of his books, Shari Yosher, which is classic work. And Rav Shimon Shkop is a very influential Talmud Chacham scholar, rabbinical figure within the yeshiva world. So it was from the world I was educated in. He did not talk about a practice from an Indian gentleman named Ramana, but he talked about the I, and that the key to devotion to others is to expand, is to identify your I, and then to expand it to include, to include other people. There's sometimes when we get help with this, and unfortunately, it's usually with tragedy that you get help with it. Although today, I don't know what you would call it, is definitely tragedy for a lot of people. It was not tragedy so far for the Jewish people, but it was tragedy for a lot of people when all those pagers blew up. But you have a moment, like when you read something like that, when you experience it today a little bit, and October 7th for months afterwards, where you experience it directly. You experience it directly. It hits you. It's like when you touch something that is hot. When you touch something that's hot, you react before your brain even processes it. Your brain's not even, your finger is off that thing before your brain even realizes it was hot. That's how fast it is. So when we hear about October 7th, and we're not going, oh my God, something happened to people I know. No, you're not even, before you're thinking, it already hit you. You want to vomit. You already want to vomit. Before you're processing it, it strikes you. That moment is experientially the interconnectedness that we all are. We are completely interconnected. That was I. It happened to me. It's I. And clearly, my I is all of us. This is not a narcissist speaking where everything's about me. That's not. This is the opposite. That I am not I without you. I am not I without all of us. My I is it encompasses the entire Jewish people. If something happens to a Jew somewhere, I don't feel it as, oh my gosh, something happened to somebody. I bet you I know a relative. No, it hit me. It hit me. I am completely interconnected with this person. That is my I. Rav Shimon Shkup was suggesting that you keep on expanding your I. You keep on expanding it. First, you have to find it. It is not so easy to find it at first because we've got so many false things that we think are I. And you gotta remove them. And by the way, as I was working on this, I realized I've been working on this for decades. For decades.
Yep.
I taught a class at a place called Sharfman's, Banos Torah Institute in Jerusalem. It's a seminary for young women who finished high school and want to spend a year or two studying in Israel. And I taught there, and I was asked to teach a class that was about interpersonal relationships. So, but for the first class, this was the first time, I'm teaching this course. I chose to teach this class, which I actually got the idea for this class from a series of workbooks that my father had from Indiana University. And they were like all these kind of workshop things you could do with kids to explore self and issues that matter most. And I got several of my ideas for that course from that class. But so this one was just to answer the question, who are you? Answer the question, who are you? And then I asked them to write it down on a piece of paper and then hand them in. And then I read some of them anonymously. I didn't read their names, but I read some of them. And there would be something like, I am a 17-year-old girl from Staten Island. My father's a doctor. My mother's a nurse. I have two brothers and a sister. I like ice skating, or something like that. And one after another. And then at the end, I asked them, now that you hear this, do you think that this really captures you? If you wanted to share with me who you are, do you think you captured it in this paragraph? And they all agreed that it did not. So we spent the rest of that class talking about things we might think we are, but we're not. So we are not our things. We are not our things. That you can start with because a lot of people will agree with you right away that they are not their things. But if you explore it, you will find, I find, that it's a little blurry sometimes. After all, I might buy something because I think it will
Me.
right? Either it's me or I want it to be me because it contains status with it, or
You
people
ever,
will.
like, gotten an object from somebody you love and they
This is different. This is different. But it ends up being the same. But the first step of it is, well, even that, but that confuse. I'm going to set that example aside because if it's like a memento from somebody you love,
somebody's sweater,
right? It might carry somebody's love in your mind. You get to experience it. I agree that there always are with these things some exceptional case you could come up with where you'd give it a pass because it does something else for you, but it's still true by that thing. It's not you. If it gets taken away, there's nothing different about you, right? But there are people who feel like if their car was taken away or their house was taken away or their money was taken away, they would think that they have been personally violated. That's how many of us describe it when somebody steals something from us. I feel like I've been personally violated. And many of us make a psychological bond to our object. This is even recognized in halachically, because a person can keep a lost object that they found if they find out that the other person gave up on ever finding it. If the other person says, I'm never going to find it, and then you find it afterwards, it's nice to return it to them, but you don't have to. Once they've given up, it's called yirush. Once they have given up that bond to it, they do not own it anymore. And there are times when you can assume yirush because there's nobody who's going to think they're going to get it. If a boat is sinking with their stuff on it, you can assume. And the Gemara even says, even the guy standing and jumping up and down on the beach and going, I don't give up on it. I don't give up on it. If it is sinking to the bottom of the sea, he has given up on it. So there is this psychological bond which gets explored in the Gemara from all different angles, but we do have a psychological bond. The very fact that I can call something mine, it's such a weird idea. It's such a weird idea. It's mine. What does that even mean? What is this connection? But we have it. And we can confuse it with me. I am not that. I shed that. Shed it. I am not my things. I am not my circumstances. I'm not my situation, which includes my job. I am not that. That is not my I. My I, that's something I do, but it's not I. It's not me. It is not, and I can get very tied into that. There are many people who are changing careers or moving on from a career. Let's say somebody was a doctor. It's very hard not to think of yourself as a doctor. You worked very hard for it. You've been doing it for a long time. Now let's say you stop. You are no different today than you were yesterday. But I don't feel that way. And if I don't feel that way, it's because I came to believe that it is me. But it is not. It is something I do. That one's a little harder for some people, but it's true. It's true. You are no different. Shabbos is a time to practice that, because for most professions, you cannot practice it on Shabbos, or you do not practice it on Shabbos, and Shabbos allows you to reflect on that. In fact, Rabbi Tursky in Milwaukee, Rabbi Michal Tursky, should live long and in good health. He would say that you quote the Kotzker Rebbe. The Kotzker Rebbe says that Shabbos, the term means to return to yourself, lasheves, to return to yourself. 6 days you're out there. You're out there. But on the 7th, you come back. You return to yourself. And returning to yourself is happening when you're not doing whatever that was. There are some people who say the week is for doing and Shabbos is for being. That's how some people characterize it. So my I, this I of mine, is not that either. It's not what I do. It's not my circumstances. And also, sorry, I keep on getting, there's like a million texts going up on my phone here while this is going on. I'm sorry I'm doing that. It's grandchildren. It's cute when it happens, but it's a little bit annoying. We're not adjectives, which means I'm not tall, I'm not short, I'm not smart, I'm not dumb, I'm not fast, I'm not slow. After a while, you can figure this out because they're all subjective. They all have to do with whatever group you happen to be with. It could be that you are the smartest person in the group you're with, and that could matter if, in order to save yourselves, somebody has to solve a math problem very quickly. It doesn't matter that often, but it could matter in circumstances like that. It could matter that you're the fastest person in the group there because somebody has to quickly get out to get help and you're the fastest runner. So then it could matter. But and it doesn't have anything to do, fast or smart or any of these kinds of things have nothing to do with your eye. So let's say you start removing these things. So what happened was we did a couple of those, we did all three of those, and then we finished the class. And then a week later, I came back and there was a buzz in the school when I walked through the door. And so what happened was I would teach half the school one week and half the school the next week. So the ones that weren't in the previous week's class, the minute I walked in, they're like all, gathered around me saying, "Is it true that you proved that we don't exist?"
I love it.
If I'm not that, and I'm not that, and I'm not that, then what am I? So that was going on like 30 something years ago. And I, continued with that on some level. And I didn't realize, like when I'm coming across this Ramana thing about exploring who is I didn't make the connection right away to sort of work I was doing. And when I say work I was doing, all I meant was that I'm talking about it with people and thinking about it myself for a bit, talking about it with people, thinking about myself for a bit. It's not like I was doing deep meditative work on the subject. It was just something that was part of my teaching repertoire and part of my own thinking to a certain degree. But now it was beginning of COVID, there's all this silent stuff going on. And now I'm starting to do this practice, which basically is you're asking yourself, who is I? And you're just sort of removing the stuff that you tend to confuse with I in order to, like, you're peeling away layers so that you can eventually get to I. So that I that you eventually get to is not, as with all deep things, words can't carry it. You can't really carry it, but you experience it more as the layers are coming off. You start to see it, on a deep level. You start to see it a bit. Well, one of the things that in my process I noticed that gets peeled away is this voice which thinks it's me. It thinks it's me. I call it a voice. It's sort of like the equivalent of an operating program, like of a computer. It's like it's the voice that is in charge of things like, what are we going to do today? Make sure to do this, make sure to do that. And I noticed this voice as a voice. In other words, there's times when I actually say out loud the words that it's thinking. Now, this voice, you could even split up this voice into all different kinds of voices. There's the secretary. There's the teacher. There's the parent. There's and it could go on. You've got but it's all sort of wrap it up in this, what do you call it? Operating program? What do you call those things that run a computer?
The operating system.
Operating system. Yeah. It's like the operating system, but it has all these different voices. And when Jill Taylor Bolte, who that TED Talk where she describes her stroke, My Stroke of Insight. She wrote that book, My Stroke of Insight, and there's a TED Talk that she does about it that at one point was the most popular TED Talk, out of all the TED Talks. So it's like an 18-minute TED Talk, and she describes the experience of her stroke, and that went quiet. Now, and when that went quiet, there was ecstasy. There was joy. There was a sense of interconnectedness. There was also pain because she had an aneurysm, she was having some kind of an aneurysm or something. So she had pain, but she was always, and as she goes on to say, you cannot live without that operating system. You will die without the operating system because you need the operating system. You can't function. And you also need to know what you need to do today. And you need to know, think about an artist and a manager. The stereotypical artist and the stereotypical manager. The clashes that they have. You could say these are the two, like those two sides. Like there's what she calls the left side of the brain, where all that voice is, where all that noise is. But that noise, I started to see it in the process of the who is I stuff. I started to see it more and more. And that voice, when it is quieted, the experience is interconnected. Interconnectivity, expansive kind of sense of joy, and an expansive sense of self. Not narcissistic, just an expanded sense of self. So again, you need it, and it's very good, but you benefit from it being quiet.
How
a lot.
Get it to be quiet.
Right. So you can. You can practice, and you obviously in very difficult situations you may not be able to, but in most situations you can quiet it through there's all different techniques. You could use breathing and meditating or whatever, but you can at least dim it a great deal. But one of the things about it is, again, it thinks it's you, and it doesn't know what it doesn't know. This is something I discovered about it. It doesn't know what it doesn't know. So it thinks if it doesn't know something, that's the end, and it panics. And a lot of my anxiety comes from that I trying to figure out a situation that is not designed for it. And a lot of the panic and anxiety and fear come from that. There are certain things that are just not, it's not in charge of, but it thinks it is. And because it doesn't know what to do about it, it starts to panic. And I've gotten to the point where I see it and I laugh at it at this point, because it's so funny that it thinks it's in charge of this. It's not. You're not in charge of this. That you don't need to know this. You think you're in charge of this. That's why you're trying to. One experience I had is I woke up in the morning. I remember waking up in the morning, and I'm feeling peaceful, and then suddenly I start thinking, and I get filled with anxiety, and then I say to myself, this happened years before. This happened decades ago. I say to myself, you're not in charge of the world. And I relaxed. And then I started to laugh because I apparently thought I was in charge of the world. Because I only relaxed when it became clear that I'm not. So once it became clear that I'm not, I relaxed. That means when I was anxious, I actually thought I was in charge of the world. That is this voice. It makes a lot of noise, and it is the source of a lot of fear and anxiety. It thinks it runs the world. The thing is, my operating system I can think in terms of in other words, it is my thoughts. So I think it's me. It's not me. It's just something about me. It's something, if I don't have it, I continue to exist. I'm not safe without it. I'm not safe without it, but I continue to exist and flourish according to her and her experience. You could flourish, but you're in danger because you need something to like protect you, but it's not you.
That's the warning system side.
Right. It's got there's things about it that you will need, but it's not you. Even when it's silent, you don't just continue to exist, you exist more fully and vibrantly in a very interconnected way. Hasket, be silent. Be silent. Be silent. Ushma Israel. And now listen. And you will feel the connection. You will feel the covenant. You will feel the connection with God. Just listen to it. Vishamata, you'll hear God's voice. You'll hear it. Just silence it. Just be quiet and listen. We fill our minds. If you're feeling fear now, which there's 1,000 reasons to feel fear now, but if you're feeling fear now, I am suggesting a huge part of it, maybe almost all of it, is from that thing, that I, that thinks it's you, that's your operating system, that somehow thinks it's in charge of the world, and it's trying, and it can't figure out how to run it. And it's an anxiety. And when you see it happening, you just go, you notice it. And when you notice it, it starts to quiet. Because you're not in charge of the world. You are not. I am not in charge of the world. Hashem is in charge of the world. That's our gift. That's the gift we were given. If we would listen, we'd hear it. We'd hear it. We'd hear it. But we got so much noise. We're not listening. We don't hear it. We don't hear it. We're not listening. We don't hear it. So I think I'm running the world. If I'm running the world, who's going to be president? What if they do this? What if they do that? I got all this anxiety because I think I'm running the world. But what's going to happen with Israel? What's going to happen with Israel? I'm running the world. I got to figure it out. If I don't know it, all sorts of red lights are going off, buzzers are sounding, alarms, because I don't know what to do. I got to be, and I'm in charge, and I'm panicking like I'm in charge of the world. I'm not in charge of the world. You know what I got to do? Do what God told me to do. Just do what God told me to do. It's in here. The stuff's in here. You know what a huge chunk of it is? Be happy for the good that God gave us. That was it. That's a giant portion of it. It's a giant portion of it. Now take it and be happy with the good that God gave us. That's what I should be spending my time with. I should not be spending my time with who said what in an election, or what people from Lebanon are planning to do, or what the Houthis are planning on doing. It's not my business. If I'm actually in Israeli intelligence, then I do have to spend time thinking about it. I don't happen to be. I don't think they've consulted me in the past.
But you never know.
You never know. But I wouldn't be able to admit it, let's
That's
just
right.
say, if they had.
Mhm.
No, but I'm not in charge of it. So why am I worrying about it? Like I'm in charge, like they put me in charge. It's like I think I'm living in a Kafka story. I've been put in charge of the entire planet, but I don't even know how to take care of it. It's not I don't have to just, but that's what it is. It's that I see it. I see it. It's this thing that parades as if it's me. It's my operating system, and I'm very grateful for it. But it's not me, and I'm okay when it's silent. I need it when it needs to be there, but it can be silent a lot, and I'm okay when it's silent. And then all the anxiety and fear and everything goes away because I'm not actually in charge of those other things. Nobody thought I was going to be. It's comical. It's comical that I get all this anxiety about something that I'm not in charge of. Somebody else is in charge of it.
Well,
Let him
fire
do the
them.
job. No, he knows what he's doing. You just go about doing your thing. When was the last time you were just living in the happiness for the good that you were given. Just spend time doing that. Spend time doing that. And with that, I bid you adieu. Lehitraot until next week. I suggest we get
Okay.
together next week.
Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
There's an
this-
example. Lois
Yes, I
spends
know.
all day.
What-
Asking
Enjoy
I am. I'm enjoying-
gratitude.
Well,
for
I'm
the
certainly
good that she
enjoying your
was given.
class. I'm enjoying your class and I'm looking forward to tomorrow's class. It's wonderful. Can I ask you?
Don't look forward to tomorrow, just today, Lois. Just
Well, that's the thing. If you are given, the power and the responsibility, let's say to vote,
then just do it. You just do it. You do it as an
just
effort.
do it, but don't you have to you are in charge of something
you're
at
not.
that point.
No, you're
Oh,
not.
yes, you are.
No,
Oh,
you're
yes,
not.
you
You're not in charge
are.
of anything. You're not in charge of
What?
anything.
Well, then
You're not in
what?
charge of anything
No, I
but
go
going to the
vote.
voting booth. That's
What?
it.
Oh, really?
Make sure you get to the voting booth and you cast your vote. You're not responsible for the results. You're one out of 300 million people that are voting or whatever.
And sometimes
150
someone
million.
wins by one vote. Please, of course you're responsible.
No, you were not responsible for that. God, you are not responsible for that. Don't think you are. You are not responsible for that. You're like the baseball player who makes a catch and think he won the game for the whole team. The guy makes one catch. He made a catch. What are the initials? I saw Pete Crow Armstrong. I saw him in Des Moines last year. He makes a catch at the end of the game at the wall, reaches over. He won the game. No, there were hundreds of factors, thousands of factors that went into winning that game. He did one thing. That's what you're supposed to do. You do your thing. But managing the whole thing and making sure the whole thing happens and how it comes together, that is all of us guided by Hashem. You are not ever in charge of what happens in the world. You're
It's
only
not
in charge of making an effort. And
You're
there's
in
no
charge of your own. You're in
just
charge
an
of your
effort.
own.
No, that's
Okay,
it.
okay.
You're just making an effort. This is like a 30-year discussion we've been having. Okay. All right. Be well.
Bye. Thank
Thanks,
you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.